From a young age, I was destined to be a sterling family daughter-in-law. At 20, I married Julian, who had autism. For 5 years of our marriage, Julian always disliked me, never allowing my touch, let alone marital intimacy. Later, he met a girl. In front of her, he kept all his temper in check, clumsily tried to be agreeable, wrote songs for her and gave her gifts. Even the study, which he never allowed me to set foot in, was opened up completely to that girl. I knew Julian had someone he liked, and I didn't want to care for him anymore. So I approached Grandpa Henry Sterling and told him I wanted a divorce. Before I met Julian, my life hadn't been easy. Lillian was a sucker for good looks. She fell for Richard's looks, fell head over heels, and married him without truly understanding him. And then I came along. Only after I was born did Lillian discover that Richard was from a prominent family, the kind that could ensure his comfort for life with just a wave of the hand. But the bad news was, Richard was a prominent family, a man who married into wealth. In other words, he was a man from humble beginnings who married into a prominent family, who used his wife to climb into high society, and Lillian was an unwanted burden. When it came to officially discovering infidelity, it was Lillian who was caught. Don't let Richard's usual pompous demeanor in front of Lillian fool you. When it came to serious matters, he was as subservient as a dog. Richard immediately cut ties with Lillian and disowned me along with her. He raised me alone, and life was tough. She drove an old beat-up pickup truck, set up a small pop-up stand, was chased by local authorities for dozens of miles, and even lost a shoe while running. Eventually, she got fed up with that life and said she would find a way out for me. I don't know what method Lillian used, but she produced my paternity test with Richard, then went to Richard's door and caused a scene, insisting Richard take responsibility for my upbringing. The prominent family, worried about the scandal getting out, agreed to the demand. From then on, Lillian and I were separated, and I was sent to the Harrington family. That day, Lillian cried tears of laughter and said, "You'll never go hungry again." But Lillian was too naive. Richard regarded me as a stain. Eleanor Harrington also disliked me, and the servants, who were quick to adapt to the prevailing power dynamics, naturally didn't give me any preferential treatment. As for my half-sisters, Ashley and Brittany, they went out of their way to bully me every day. However, Lillian would never know these things. That meeting at the Harrington family's doorstep was the last time I ever saw her. She had late-stage cancer, couldn't afford the medical bills, and after giving me to my father, she jumped into the river. I grew up in the Harrington family as a foster daughter, living cautiously and circumspectly. When I was 15, I met a boy at the Harrington family. He had been cut by a rose thorn, and the wound on his arm was still bleeding, but he seemed completely oblivious, listening to music with headphones in the garden. After a moment's thought, I brought him iodine to clean the wound, and then applied a band-aid. Later, I learned that this boy's name was Julian, and his grandfather had brought him to visit the Harrington family. For some reason, Grandpa Henry Sterling took a liking to me and wanted me to be his grandson's wife. The Sterling family was an old money family, and Richard naturally readily agreed. When Ashley and Brittany heard the news, they laughed mockingly and taunted me. "Do you think you're marrying up? If it were truly a desirable match, why would it be your turn? That Julian has had autism and bipolar disorder since childhood. He's not a normal person." But because of the engagement to Julian, Eleanor Harrington finally showed me some favor. My life at the Harrington family became much easier. At least they stopped bullying me. I often thought of that thin boy, quietly listening to music in the garden when I first met him. He didn't know how much he had unknowingly helped me. I was truly grateful to him from the bottom of my heart. I began to understand his condition and learned how to interact with him in the future. Then, at the age of 20, under the arrangement of both families, I married Julian. I didn't know Julian was so resistant to marrying me. After I moved in, he never showed me any kindness. He wouldn't allow me to touch him, let alone share marital intimacy with me. On our wedding night, he threw a huge tantrum at me in the master bedroom. "Go away! Don't be in my room! Get out! Get out!" I hung my head in shame, and a wave of humiliation washed over me. That day, Grandpa Henry Sterling came to me and said that Julian had been reclusive since childhood and disliked interacting with people. The caretaker who used to look after Julian had just passed away, and Julian's condition had been particularly bad recently. He asked me to be more understanding and patient, and to give Julian some time. I nodded in agreement. From then on, I took on the responsibility of caring for Julian, juggling responsibilities between school and the Sterling family. I had to remind Julian to take his medicine on time, take him for regular follow-up appointments at the hospital, and arrange his diet and clothes. Fortunately, Julian wasn't unresponsive. He gradually started responding to me. For instance, he stopped telling me to get out. He would awkwardly cover me with a blanket if he saw me asleep on the sofa. And he even made me a soothing hot drink when I had menstrual cramps. But he still never shared marital intimacy with me. Julian was the Sterling family, the only heir, the only male descendant in this generation. Grandpa Henry Sterling had always been eager for great-grandchildren and urged me many times, but he was unwilling to share marital intimacy, and there was nothing I could do. Finally, in the 5th year, Grandpa Henry Sterling could no longer sit still. Without my knowledge, he drugged Julian, then brought Julian to my bed, locked the bedroom door, trapping us inside. That night is still vivid in my memory. It hurt so much. Under the influence of the drugs, his eyes glazed over, and he acted on primal instinct. But he had no experience, and his movements were rough. I felt a tearing pain, and tears streamed down my face. As dawn approached, I couldn't bear it any longer and passed out. One afternoon, I was woken by the sound of things being smashed. Julian threw a huge tantrum. He smashed my cell phone, broke the television hanging on the wall, and tables and chairs tumbled everywhere. Seeing that I was awake, he walked over to me, holding a mirror that reflected my appearance. I hadn't even had time to get dressed and was covered in red marks and bruises. He pointed at my reflection in the mirror, his eyes filled with unconcealed disdain. "You're so dirty, so disgusting. I hate you. I don't want to see you again." My physical condition was extremely poor that day. I stumbled when I walked. But as soon as Julian had an episode, he disappeared. There was nothing I could do but go out and look for him. I didn't even stop to eat, searching from noon until the early hours of the morning, almost every place he usually went. By the end, my calves were trembling uncontrollably, but I still couldn't find him. As I was gasping for breath, leaning against the front door in despair, Julian finally returned at 1 a.m. And beside him stood a girl with a sweet dimple when she smiled. The girl looked up at him and said, "This is the first time I've met someone with such shared interests as you. Meeting you is the greatest gain from this concert." It was then I learned that Julian had gone to a concert alone, his phone dead, and he couldn't remember the way home, so the girl had brought him back. Julian slowed his steps. The walk home was clearly short, yet he took a long time. They talked about music, about composers and performers I didn't know. Julian had loved music since he was a child. He studied under renowned masters, and after graduating, he opened a studio and composed many famous pieces. I just stood at the front door, listening quietly. They talked for 30 minutes, but Julian never noticed I was there. It was the butler who couldn't bear to watch any longer and spoke up to remind the young master. "It's very late. You should go to bed. Your wife has been waiting for you." The girl looked over at the sound, paused slightly and asked Julian, "Is this your wife?" A look of embarrassment appeared on Julian's face. After a moment of silence, he nodded, then immediately added, "It was forced. I don't like her. I hate her." At that moment, I stood rooted to the spot, and a wave of shame inexplicably washed over me, making me suddenly feel like I wanted to disappear. The girl's name was Sage. Sage tugged at his sleeve, her eyes curving into a smile, and said, "It's getting late. We'll see each other next time." From that day on, my relationship with Julian dropped to rock bottom again. He wouldn't say a single word to me. For his birthday, I gave him a new pair of over-ear headphones. I heard the sound quality was excellent, so I specifically pre-ordered them half a year in advance. But Julian simply took a lighter and, right in front of me, burned the headphones to pieces. "I don't like you, and I don't like what you give me. Trash. I don't want them." That birthday, he went out and spent it with Sage. Since that meeting, he and Sage had kept in touch. Recently, Sage even interned at his studio. When he came back that evening, he was wearing a silver ring, a birthday gift from Sage. I looked at the remains of the headphones scattered all over the floor, and an endless weariness rose from the depths of my heart. The next day, Grandpa Henry Sterling suddenly called, asking me to go to the study to retrieve a document and hand it to his secretary. But I remembered Julian had never allowed me into the study. I hesitated, but Grandpa Henry Sterling urged me, saying the document was needed urgently, and the secretary was already waiting at the door. After a moment's thought, I went to retrieve the document and restored everything in the study to its original state before leaving. But Julian still found out about me entering the study. His phone was connected to the study security cameras. He rushed back from his studio, his brows furrowed with menace and gloom. "You can't come in. You're not allowed." His emotions were like an invisible storm, spreading unrestrainedly throughout the room. Because I went into the study to get a document, He even had the study cleaned from top to bottom. I stared blankly at him and voiced the doubts in my heart. Why can't I go in? Lately, Julian often invites Sage to spend some time at home. They discuss music in the study and stay there for an entire day. Why can Sage, but I can't? Also, I'm not dirty, so why did you have people clean the study? His expression grew even colder. She's different from you. She understands music. She's a kindred spirit. You don't understand, so if you go in, you'll just make it dirty. After so many years, I was used to his concise way of speaking and instantly understood what he meant. When his emotions flared, I always tried to calm him down first. But that day, even though I knew he was very angry, I couldn't coax him gently as usual. I closed my eyes. Julian, your words are truly hurtful. At that moment, my blood sugar dropped, and I stumbled back a step. But I was standing right in front of the study door, which wasn't closed, and with that step back, I accidentally stepped inside the study. Julian mistook my action as a provocation. His eyes turned chilling, and veins pulsed on his forehead. He pointed at me and said many harsh words, which culminated in 3 sentences. Get away from me. This is my house, not yours. Get out. Don't ever appear in my house again. This wasn't the first time I'd heard those words. When I first entered the Harrington family, my half-sisters Ashley and Brittany had spoken to me just like that. At that time, I miserably hid under the covers and cried secretly. I thought to myself, I must have a home of my own someday. A home no one could drive me out of. After marriage, I mistakenly believed this mansion with Julian was my home. Although it couldn't shelter me from life's storms, it was, after all, my refuge. But today he told me in a hoarse, strained voice that the house was in his name and his family paid for it. So this wasn't my home. And he told me to get out immediately. Emotions surged, and a feeling of helplessness threatened to overwhelm me. I hung my head and counted the days. It had been 10 years since I met Julian at 15. Because of my engagement to him at 15, I had 5 comfortable years. At 20, I married Julian and carefully looked after him for 5 years. Comparing the 2 5-year periods, I considered the Sterling family's kindness repaid. I was tired of this life. I wanted a divorce. Once the thought of divorce took root, it grew wildly, like a seed breaking through the soil. A week later, I saw Grandpa Henry Sterling and told him I wanted a divorce. Grandpa Henry Sterling sat on the sofa in the family estate, bent his index finger, tapped on the table, and asked, "Why?" I told him Julian had someone he liked. He would keep his temper in check in front of her, clumsily try to be agreeable, write songs for her, give her gifts, and stubbornly try to please her. With Sage around, Julian's mood would also be much better. Objectively or subjectively, she was a better fit for Julian than I was. Grandpa Henry Sterling listened without a sound. After a long while, he cleared his throat and asked me seriously, "Claire, do you know why I chose you as my grandson's wife back then?" I said I didn't know. He shook his head and said, "It wasn't because you gave Julian a band-aid. I investigated you and knew you were kind-hearted, and that your status was awkward, unwelcome in the Harrington family. You needed this marriage contract. With the contract, your life would be much easier, thanks to the Sterling family's influence. And precisely because of that, you would be Julian's lifeline, grateful to him, tolerant of him, and even indulgent of him. When I learned you chose psychology as your major in college, I knew I hadn't been mistaken. You indeed are." He sighed and said, "A child from Julian's background, if he hadn't fallen ill, would naturally be highly sought after. But he happened to fall ill, and since he's my only grandson, I naturally have to make plans for him, to find him a completely loyal wife who will care for him for life. I don't know what kind of girl this Sage you speak of is, and I don't feel comfortable entrusting Julian to her." At this point he looked at me and said, "To be frank, Claire, you grew up in the Harrington family. You know what wealthy men are like. It wouldn't be surprising to find them with not just one woman outside, but even 10. In comparison, Julian is naturally simple-minded, and doesn't act recklessly like other men, which is already quite good. Besides, as long as I'm here, no woman can shake your position as the legitimate wife. What more could you be dissatisfied with?" I understood what he meant, but I didn't want to keep caring for someone with autism at home, living a life where I could see the end at a glance. Julian told me to leave. I earnestly told Grandpa Henry Sterling. Now my presence only annoys him, and his episodes have become more frequent lately. Upon hearing this, Grandpa Henry Sterling's expression gradually became serious, and he began to reconsider my relationship with Julian. After a long while, he finally relented. "Claire, I'll think about the divorce. You can go back for now. Also, Julian is your husband after all. and his opinion must also be consulted on this matter. I nodded and got up to leave. How could Julian possibly disagree? He must be eager to sign the divorce papers. Today, a drizzling spring rain fell, and it was very windy outside. As I left the family estate, I saw Julian. He was standing by Ethan's door, wearing a white shirt, holding an umbrella. A large puddle of water had collected on the tip of his umbrella, and I wondered how long he had been standing there, or how much he had overheard. The moment he saw me, his lips were tightly pressed, and his face was pale. He said, "You said you want to divorce me." After receiving my affirmative answer, Julian didn't speak for a moment, seemingly deep in thought. After a while he asked me, "Then after we divorce, will you still take care of me?" I froze for a moment and couldn't help but let out a wry laugh. "Julian, divorce means we become strangers from now on. I will no longer be your wife, and I will have no obligation to care for you." After hearing this, he was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "No divorce." I truly hadn't expected him not to want a divorce. I asked him why, and he said, "If we divorce, no one will take care of me." I said, "Don't you like Sage? You could let her take care of your daily needs." But Julian stubbornly shook his head. "No, she's busy. She has to create. She can't always be at home. Before you took care of me." I hung my head, staring at the puddle in the shallow pit, and felt a chill spread through my heart. He believed Sage had her own pursuits and couldn't bear to keep her confined at home, while I, a woman he considered boring and vulgar, was born to revolve around him. "Julian, if you need someone to take care of you, you can hire a nanny. Before I came, didn't Martha take good care of you too?" I tried to reason with him, but he adamantly stuck to his opinion, insisting that I be the one to care for him. As he spoke, his hands clenched into fists, and his palms were dug into with deep scratches. This was a precursor to an episode. I didn't want to argue with him anymore, so I turned and walked back home. He followed behind me, repeating "no divorce" over and over. If I didn't agree, he would dig his nails into his hands until they bled profusely. The Sterling family was very wealthy. They could certainly afford a nanny. I didn't understand why Julian was so stubborn. After I asked, he stammered and mumbled for a long time, then said 2 words. "Habit." "Habits are formed gradually," I told him. "When I first started taking care of you, weren't you unaccustomed to it too? Everything has an adaptation process. The more you adjust and adapt, the more you'll get used to it." When he was stubborn, he was more stubborn than a mule. Seeing that I wouldn't cooperate, he started shouting, "No, no divorce. You have to listen to me." I knew it was useless to try and persuade him at a time like this, so I simply shut my mouth. He thought I had agreed, and his tightly furrowed brows finally slowly relaxed. The moment he saw Sage at the front door, his eyes lit up instantly. The divorce was thrown to the back of his mind, and he and Sage went into the study together. Before Julian went in, he deliberately locked the study, as if afraid someone might barge in. Soon after, from inside, came the melodious sound of the piano and the girls' bright laughter. Everything seemed vibrant with life. When Sage came out, it was already 10 p.m., and it was pouring rain outside. Julian glanced at the rain and called out to her, "You'll get sick if you go out in the rain. Stay here tonight." Sage blinked and smiled at him. "Silly, I didn't bring pajamas. How can I stay?" Julian pointed at me and said, "She has some." "Then you'll have to ask your wife if she agrees to me staying tonight, and if she's willing to lend me clothes," Sage said, looking at me with a beaming smile. But before I could answer, Julian interjected, "She's willing." A faint dimple appeared on Sage's cheek, and tilting her head, she teased playfully him. "How can you answer for someone else like that?" Julian pointed at the mansion and said, "This is my home, not hers." Then he pointed at the walk-in closet and said, "The clothes were bought with my family's money, so I decide." So Sage sweetly said to me, "Mrs. Sterling, then I'll stay tonight. I hope I won't disturb your marital intimacy." Upon hearing this, Julian's reaction was even greater than mine. He hastily explained, even waving his hands, "We don't do that kind of thing. It's disgusting." I listened quietly, not looking up, silently scrolling through my phone. Julian was right. This wasn't my home. I decided to move out. Finding a suitable apartment wasn't easy. When I was with the Harrington family, I had no pocket money. If I lacked anything, I'd tell the butler, and for reasonable requests, the butler would usually agree. After I came to the Sterling family, Grandpa Henry Sterling gave me $50,000 a month for living expenses. It seemed like a lot, but it included medical expenses for Julian's companion, psychological intervention fees, nutritious meals, and the food and salaries for all staff in the mansion. After careful budgeting, only a few thousand could be saved each month. So my savings weren't substantial. After looking for 2 days, I found a reasonably priced apartment. While I was tidying my clothes, Julian happened to come home. Since I had brought up divorce last time, his attitude towards me had softened slightly. Occasionally he would initiate conversation with me, like now, asking if I was throwing away the things I was tidying. I shook my head and said no. He pointed at me and said, "Those clothes are ugly. You don't understand art, and you can't put outfits together. All these clothes are ugly." I stopped what I was doing, looked at him, and asked, "Then what kind of clothes look good?" He thought seriously for a moment and replied, "Sage looks good like that. You should learn from her. I have money. I can buy them for you." I looked at the white dress stacked on top and paused slightly. This dress was one he had personally chosen a year ago when Julian accompanied me shopping. I still vividly remembered his reaction when I came out of the fitting room. He stammered and repeated over and over, "Beautiful." Yet the dress was still the same dress, but he now considered it old-fashioned and outdated. Had the clothes changed, or had the person? I lowered my gaze, kept my hands moving, and said, "No need. I like my own style." A dark cloud gradually gathered in Julian's eyes. He mumbled, "Suit yourself," then turned and left. The door slammed shut with a loud bang, hurting my eardrums. That night, he didn't leave his room again, so he didn't know I had left the mansion. When I left the family, I was carrying a 24-inch suitcase and a blue backpack. When I left the Sterling family, I still had this same set of belongings. Julian was right. This wasn't my home. So the things that truly belonged to me were pathetically few. I only stayed in the apartment for 1 day before setting off for Harmony Ridge. When I was little, Lillian always told me that life would get better and better, and once she saved enough money, she would take me traveling. After Lillian was gone, I also convinced myself that life would get better and better, and once I saved enough money, I would travel by myself. Things never quite went as planned. I had merely jumped from one cage into another. Julian couldn't be left alone, so I couldn't travel far. I once tried to take him out with me, but he had lived in this city for a long time, and found it difficult to adapt to changes in environment. Lacking a sense of security, he experienced distress on the high-speed train, and even eating became a problem. There was nothing I could do but take him off the train at the next station and go home. As excited as I was when planning the trip, that's how disappointed I was the moment we got off the train. It turned out that even having saved enough money didn't guarantee travel, because there were ties, because there wasn't time. But at this moment, I finally stood at the foot of Whispering Peaks. The wind ruffled the water of Silverwood Lake and sculpted the clouds. I listened to music, pedaling leisurely along the path on my bicycle. My route passed through wheat fields, open plains, shimmering reflections, and the floating clouds cradled by Whispering Peaks. All the rhythms of conformity were shattered in that moment. Amidst the sound of Silverwood Lake's waves, life swayed freely, and I became a useless yet vibrant person. Burned-out souls gathered here, setting up all sorts of small stalls. We gathered on the ground, under the vast starry sky, exchanging stories. There was an aspiring doctor who was almost driven to a breakdown by work, and quit on the spot to travel and live here. She said that here, days were finally no longer cut into scattered fragments by holidays. There were also patients healing from their illnesses, who said that no one knew what the future held, but at least at this moment, they were growing. We gathered briefly, touching the softest, most hidden corners of each other's hearts. Then, like the 18 streams winding down Whispering Peaks, each flowed in our own winding paths. Later, I went to Sunrise Point Pier alone to watch the sunrise. The ripples on Silverwood Lake shattered the sunlight into dancing silver coins. I didn't cry when I struggled to survive in the Harrington family. I didn't cry when Julian verbally abused and drove me out of the house. But at this moment, I covered my face, and my shoulders trembled uncontrollably. I had never felt freedom so deeply before. No scheduled alarms, no tedious reminders in a notebook. I answered the call of the distant mountains, and could daydream for an entire day. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that I reinserted my SIM card. When I left the Sterling family, I had sent Grandpa Henry Sterling a text message, briefly explaining the situation. After inserting the card today, there were only missed calls. From Richard, from Grandpa Henry Sterling, and from Julian. Sitting in the returning car, I dialed Grandpa Henry Sterling's number. "Claire," he said, a deep weariness in his voice, "come back quickly. Julian isn't doing well." I still returned to the Sterling family. After discovering I had left, Julian was very angry. He didn't know how to live his life. For instance, with the bottles and containers in the medicine cabinet, he didn't know how many pills to take each day. Before, I always poured water and placed the medicine in front of him. That day he had a launch event, but he didn't know where his matching tie for a suit was. He tried to contact me, but he couldn't reach me. I heard from the butler that Julian had thrown a huge tantrum. He had smashed all the cups and bowls, pushed over the large floor lamp, and even overturned the coffee table and sideboard. The house was in a complete mess. Grandpa Henry Sterling had no choice but to find him a new nanny, but the new nanny didn't understand him and was at a loss for how to handle him. When I returned, Julian had lost a lot of weight. His chin had become noticeably sharper. When he saw me, his gaze darkened, and he coldly turned his head away, snorting, "Why are you back? Weren't you going to leave? I hate you, liar." While I was traveling, Grandpa Henry Sterling found the landlord of the apartment I rented. I don't know what he said, but the landlord refused to rent that apartment to me anymore. So I carried my luggage back again. Julian looked at the suitcase in my hand and let out a low snort. The Harrington family didn't want you, and you had nowhere to live, so you still had to come back. I didn't explain, silently moving my luggage back to the room. The moment I turned my back, Julian behind me subtly curved his lips. He seemed somewhat pleased. He didn't know the real reason I had returned. The apartment was no longer available, but I could rent another one. I could even leave this city and live somewhere new. Grandpa Henry Sterling and I talked a lot on the phone. I told him I had researched family law and could file for divorce first. If the first filing fails, it's okay. I will legally separate for a year before filing for final divorce with Julian. According to legal provisions, I would win the second time. He asked me why I insisted on divorce when I wouldn't get much money from it. Yes, Grandpa Henry Sterling was very shrewd. Before the marriage, he made Julian and me sign a prenuptial agreement, so all of Julian's assets, including the studio, were premarital. If we divorced, I would almost have to leave with nothing. I knew that, but I still wanted the divorce. The marriage contract with Julian had sheltered me for 5 years, and I had also cared for him for 5 years. Balancing out, it was a fair exchange. On the other end of the phone, Grandpa Henry Sterling was silent for a very long time. Just when I thought he was about to hang up, he said, "I've hired a new nanny, but he doesn't know how to care for Julian. You take care of him for another month, and ensure a smooth handover. As compensation, I won't stand in the way of your divorce, and I'll give you another $1 million. The offer was too generous. I couldn't refuse. So Julian didn't know this was my last month by his side. The butler said that while I was away, he hadn't been eating properly, but that evening, Julian ate 2 bowls of rice. He snorted at me and praised me. Great. I smiled and, as before, softly said, "Great." A beautiful curve appeared at the corner of his lips. Once he returned to the study, I hastily told the new Brenda. "He likes to be praised. You can praise him more often. If he makes a mistake, don't point it out on the spot. Subtly remind him afterward." Brenda took out a small notebook and wrote down every word I said. I then took him to the medicine cabinet and told him how many times a day to take each medicine and how many pills each time, and that he needed to take them with water that wasn't too hot, preferably lukewarm water around 40 degrees Celsius. His ties and cufflinks were in the second drawer of the wardrobe. He needed a glass of hot milk before bed. I told Brenda about his habits, and Brenda listened attentively. After I returned, Julian's life returned to normal, nor did he have any more episodes. But that day, when Brenda went to give him his medicine, the sound of a cup smashing suddenly rang out from the room. When I rushed over, the floor was a complete mess. Shattered glass shards and scattered pills were everywhere. Julian was standing barefoot, and he had accidentally stepped on a piece of broken glass. Blood flowed out, but he was completely oblivious. He just pointed at Brenda and asked me word by word, "Why is it him? Why isn't it you? This is clearly something you do. Why did you switch people?" As he spoke, he clutched my sleeve and shook his head, saying, "I don't want anyone else. I only want you to bring me my medicine." So I poured water and got his medicine for him again. His emotions came and went quickly. After watching him obediently take the medicine I brought, I asked him why he wanted me. He looked at me and said, "When I saw it wasn't you, I got a little scared." I softly asked, "Scared of what?" He replied, "Scared you're going to hand me over to someone else, then leave and not want me anymore." I must say his intuition was quite sharp. I was indeed transitioning with Brenda, letting her gradually take over Julian's life. Julian also tugged at my sleeve and said, "I still want you to come in the future. Don't switch people. Promise me you won't leave." Given Julian's stubborn personality, If I told him the truth, he would certainly throw a huge fit. I didn't want to spend energy calming him down anymore, so I looked him straight in the eyes and lied to him. Okay, I promise you, I won't leave and I won't switch people. Only half a month left anyway, just feed him medicine for another half a month. Julian curved his lips and smiled contentedly. He didn't notice that his leg was still bleeding, and this time I didn't bring him iodine to clean the wound as usual. Nor did he notice Brenda's pitying gaze. Everyone knew I was leaving, but he was immersed in his own world. That afternoon, I saw Sage again. She stood at the mansion entrance, her gaze falling upon the floor-to-ceiling window of the study on the second floor, where Julian sat by the window, playing the piano with his head bowed. Sage lingered for a long time. She didn't seek out Julian, but sought me out instead. She handed me a stack of yellow sheet music, saying she had been looking for this piece of music, and asked me to please hand it over to him. I paused slightly and said, "Julian is right upstairs. Aren't you going yourself?" Sage shook her head, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of her lips. She said, "He doesn't want to see me anymore." It was then I realized that Sage used to frequent the Sterling family every few days, but lately she hadn't appeared, and even the ring she gave Julian had disappeared. Sage spoke softly, interrupting my thoughts. She asked me, "You like Julian, you can tell, right?" I nodded and said, "It's so obvious, how could I not tell?" At the music festival, when I first saw him, everyone else was in groups, but he was alone and solitary, not fitting in with the crowd. I noticed him at a glance. He was so handsome. I forgot what piece was being played that day. I was only focused on staring at him. After learning his phone was dead, I took the opportunity to offer to take him home. I wasn't an idiot. After exchanging a few words with him, I knew he was different from normal people, but I found him especially cute and pure just the way he was. When Julian was mentioned, a faint smile spread in Sage's eyes. She said, "After you left, Grandpa Henry Sterling contacted me and said you were filing for divorce." When I heard that news, I was actually very happy. I always thought you and Julian were from two different worlds. He was immersed in the world of art, while your eyes only saw the mundane necessities of life. Julian and I have the same idols, like the same pieces of music, and when we were together, there was always endless music to talk about. I was a better fit for him than you. I even thought it would be good if Julian divorced you. I could take on the responsibility of caring for him. But do you know what happened? Sage kept talking to me at the mansion entrance. I asked her if she wanted to come in and sit down, but she lifted her eyes, her gaze falling upon Julian on the second floor, and shook her head. Sage said, "After I left, Grandpa Henry Sterling stayed at the mansion with Julian for a few days. In the study, Julian talked about music with him, but once they left the study, Julian started talking about you. I made him a strawberry cake, and he paused for a moment and actually told me, 'You like strawberries the most.' There was a row of dolls on the living room sofa, and he said you had personally sewn them. You even named each doll together. There were photos of you two displayed in the showcase in his room. I tried to count how many, but I couldn't count them all. Do you know what I found most unacceptable?" Sage looked up at me, her eyes dim. "Julian played a chord and told me that melody suited you very well. He had never been separated from you for so long before. He missed you." I truly didn't know these things. And then it suddenly dawned on me. Julian and I had known each other for so long, yet he had never talked about anything with me other than music, and we had never had any physical contact. I asked him if he would divorce you, and he replied directly and decisively, without a hint of hesitation, that he would not. That night, I was a little desperate. I wanted to prove he liked me, so I went into his room, took off my clothes in front of him, and asked him to try with me. He said he felt disgusted when he was with you before, and if he was willing to be with me like this, would it prove he liked me? I didn't say anything, just listened quietly as Sage finished her story. I hadn't expected his reaction: disbelief, panicked confusion, disgust, rejection. I couldn't quite put a name to that complex expression. In short, he was furious. He threw my hand away and banished me. Before I left, his face was flushed with anger. He said he thought I was different from others, but it turned out I was just as vulgar. He also said not to come looking for him again. He never wanted to see me. Sage lowered her eyelashes, masking the desolation in her eyes, and said, "When I left, he was sitting in the pile of dolls on the sofa, softly calling your name. Initially, when I liked a married man, I could still tell myself that Julian didn't like you, that you had bound him with marriage when he was unaware, and that the unloved one was the true third party. But now he gazed distantly at the person through a pane of glass, exhaled deeply, and I still like him. But I know it's impossible now. Please give the sheet music to him. I searched for it for a very long time. Sage stood at the Sterling family entrance for over an hour, but Julian never once looked down at him. When he left, he walked very slowly, but even after he completely disappeared from my sight, he still didn't get the eye contact he longed for with the person he wished to see. Julian has been particularly clingy lately, even initiating conversations just to talk to me. He asked me where I'd been for the past 2 weeks, and I showed him travel photos and videos, sharing those interesting experiences with him. At the Spring Creek Market, there was handmade jewelry crafted from local botanicals that was especially creative. If you saw it, you'd definitely love it too. Do you know about tie-dyeing, carved wooden cats, botanical pressing, and printmaking? See, I made all of these myself. They're very meaningful. I also went up the mountain with people from the local village to forage for mushrooms, walking along the valley streams and picking a full basket. It was the first time I truly experienced the joy of a bountiful harvest. Sorry, am I talking too much? I'm usually not a talkative person, but for some reason, whenever Julian asked about my travels, I'd just ramble on endlessly, not even giving him a chance to get a word in. Julian just smiled, resting his chin in his hand as he watched me, and said, "It's fine, you talk, I'll listen." He listened quietly as I vividly described everything I'd seen and heard, then suddenly asked, "Do you really like to travel?" I nodded without hesitation and said, "But I always feel a bit safer at home. Still, it's fine, we can try." I paused, then asked, "Try what?" Julian kept turning the carved wooden cat I'd made over and over in his hands, but he didn't answer me. Lately, he hadn't been going to his studio. Instead, he preferred staying home. One day, he suddenly called my name from the study, "Claire." I asked him what was wrong. He pushed the door open, waved me over, and said, "Come in." I still remembered Julian's furious outburst the last time I entered the study, so I didn't move, remaining at the study's entrance. But he took my sleeve and led me into the study, saying, "From now on you can come in. No one else can, only you." He had a gift for me. The study was large. Besides the desk and chairs, there was a white piano. Today, Julian was dressed in a black suit, and he had even put on a tie, which he only did when he was about to play. The floor-to-ceiling windows cast the evening sun's light upon Julian. He was bathed in the sunset, his hair tips gilded with a faint golden edge. His index finger danced, and notes poured from his fingertips. Some people are naturally tone-deaf, like me. I don't understand adagio legato. I only knew that at this moment, the piano music layered one upon another, like dense waves in the early spring sea, stirring up gusts of wind and clouds, echoing airily. When the piece ended, he looked up at me and asked, "Does it sound good?" I nodded and clapped sincerely, saying, "It sounds wonderful." He said, "This is a first draft, it still needs refining." He pointed to a thick stack of sheet music and said, "It'll be even better with more revisions." I really liked the piece, so I asked him its name. Julian hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "I haven't thought of a name yet. This piece is for you. Your birthday is in a few days, so this is your gift." I was stunned, not expecting him to give me such a gift. He coughed lightly twice, then suddenly changed the subject and asked, "Do you know why I got sick?" I had asked Grandpa Henry Sterling about this, and he told me that Julian's illness was caused by improper care from a nanny. But Julian told me it had nothing to do with the nanny, it was Richard's mother. He was silent for a moment, seemingly wanting to explain the full story, but his fingers wouldn't stop trembling, as if merely recalling the past had already drained all his strength. I said, "It's okay. If it's too painful, you don't have to tell me." I poured him a glass of warm water. He gritted his teeth, as if preparing himself mentally. It was a long time before he spoke, with great difficulty. Richard pursued Lillian for a long time before she finally agreed. 2 years into their marriage, Lillian discovered that Richard was seeing other women besides her. The first time Lillian was very angry, and Richard knelt, promising to change. But then there was a second, a third, a fourth time. I even saw Richard with other people at home. It was truly disgusting. Lillian couldn't take it anymore and moved out with me. Richard came looking for us, begging Lillian for forgiveness. Lillian's heart softened again and she went home. After going back, Lillian discovered that Richard hadn't broken off with the other woman. In fact, he even brought her along when he came to find Lillian. Lillian would be here, coaxing me to sleep, while Richard was sleeping with that woman next door. But this time, Lillian didn't cry or make a fuss. She was suddenly very calm. She even invited Richard to go on a trip together. It was the first and only trip we ever took as a family of 3. She tightly clenched her sleeve, suppressing the surging emotions. That night, in a strange city, Lillian took a knife and stabbed Richard in the heart. Richard, covered in blood, fought back desperately, grabbing Lillian's neck. I was locked on the balcony by Lillian, desperately banging on the door, but unable to get out. When I woke up, Richard's mother wasn't moving anymore. I froze on the spot. This was completely different from the version I had heard. The love story of Julian's father and mother was once a celebrated tale within the prominent family. Julian's father had already been set for an arranged marriage, but he fell in love at first sight with Julian's mother, who came from an ordinary family. Julian's mother didn't want to get involved with an old money family, and initially didn't accept his father's proposal. Julian's father devoted himself to her, and after 4 years, his mother was moved and finally accepted his marriage proposal. After their marriage, the couple was deeply in love, and not long after, Julian was born. Unfortunately, good times didn't last. During an outing, Julian's mother passed away from a heart attack. Julian's father didn't want his deceased wife to be alone and died by suicide out of love. But who would have thought that beneath such a celebrated love story lay a past so heartless and bloody? Julian, who witnessed his parents' deaths, was only 6 years old and his mind was not yet fully developed. He fell seriously ill and woke up like this. I finally understood why Julian felt insecure when he went out, and was so resistant to marriage and intimate relationships. Julian said all this because he wanted me to know his complete self. He sat beside me, hesitated for a moment, then slowly, little by little, touched the back of my hand with his palm. I know I have an illness and I will overcome it. From now on, you can come into the study. You can even take my hand without me saying so, and I won't pull away. I'll dutifully take my medicine and won't lose my temper with you. He looked at me intently, his sincere gaze as if he were baring his heart to me. It was the first time I truly felt the warmth of his palm. I wasn't sure if it was the dim light, but his voice was exceptionally gentle. Claire, let's travel together. I'll try going to a new place, and when we come back, I'll celebrate your birthday. He took my hand, opened the map, and carefully studied the cities on it. Watching the sky gradually darken, I called Grandpa Henry Sterling and told him about Julian's wish to travel. Grandpa Henry Sterling pondered for a moment, then asked me, "Have you completed the handover with Brenda?" At this point, it was less than a week until my departure. If I went on this trip, I was supposed to leave directly upon our return. I had already conveyed everything necessary to Brenda. Grandpa Henry Sterling hummed in response, then said, "It's good that he's willing to go out and about. Take him to see some sights." Julian and I discussed it for a long time and decided to go to Inner Mongolia together. Julian researched the itinerary, planned the trip, and even specifically took out a camera, saying he could take photos of me and help me record memories. He was a very organized person. He created a packed schedule, even deciding what we would eat each day in advance. Our destination this time was the Golden Step. When boarding the plane, I could distinctly feel Julian's emotional fluctuations. Perhaps because of his experience being locked on the balcony, he disliked such confined spaces. Just like that time on the high-speed train, he became particularly restless and anxious. As he sat next to me, he tugged at my sleeve and leaned closer and closer. Airplanes are different from high-speed trains. You can't get off midway. If you're not feeling well, we can go back. Don't force yourself. Julian pressed his lips together, shook his head and said, "It's fine, we're going. I don't want to spoil your fun again." As the plane took off, he held my hand, his palm covered in a fine sheen of sweat. Mid-flight, we encountered severe turbulence. Julian kept his eyes closed the entire time, as if napping, but his sweat-dampened hair and the tight grip on my hand still betrayed his current emotions. He was very nervous. After the plane arrived in Redstone, it would take another 4 hours by private car. Julian remained highly vigilant. The completely different climate and environment made him even more anxious and sensitive than usual. I kept reassuring him along the way. He pulled his lips into a smile for me and said, "Claire, I'm fine." I believed him, and after taking him to the hotel suite, I took a hot shower first. When I came out, I saw Julian crouching in the corner, his entire body trembling slightly. Upon seeing me, he took 2 deep breaths, opened his suitcase and rummaged through it, then took 2 tranquilizers. Before I could speak, he feigned nonchalance and stood up saying, "I'll go shower too. I'm fine, really fine, don't worry." That night, he tossed and turned for a long time, as if unable to sleep. For years, every night, he hadn't left the bed in the mansion. He must have been unaccustomed to sleeping in a different bed. I softly asked him, "Do you want me to tell you a bedtime story?" He said, "It's fine, I'm almost asleep." You sleep too. We'll see the grasslands together tomorrow. After that, he didn't toss and turn anymore, remaining quiet, as if he had truly fallen asleep. But the next day, the dark circles under his eyes still revealed the fact that he hadn't slept well all night. He ate very little, and often popped pills into his mouth. Originally, I had really looked forward to the vast grasslands, but seeing him in such poor condition, my thoughts were entirely focused on him, and I didn't even get a chance to admire the morning mist over Princess Lake. Regardless, I was the one who brought him here, so I had to take good care of him. Later, Julian pointed to the rolling mountains in the distance and said, "Don't look at me, go over there, I'll take your picture." He took out his phone to photograph me, his hand trembling slightly as he pressed the shutter. Other tourists saw him and let out a soft, "Oh," saying, "Why does he look so unwell, like he has altitude sickness? That can't be right. The altitude here isn't even 2,000 meters. Julian looked at me, trying to explain. "Just adapt a little, it's fine." He pulled me along and took many photos, but he was never quite satisfied, saying, "No, that's not right." I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't answer. I quickly twisted my sleeve into a knot. An elderly man walked by, shaking his head and sighing. These young people nowadays really love taking pictures. Their partner looks so ill. Instead of taking them to the hospital, they're still here taking photos. Julian looked down, somewhat embarrassed, staring at his shoe tips, and took a deep breath. "Claire, after we're done with photos, let's take a walk first." We walked together across the vast grasslands. A couple nearby ran freely against the mountain wind. Watching their retreating figures, I quietly sighed. How free they are. He tried to quicken his pace, running with me in the wilderness, but the unfamiliar surroundings made him exceptionally cautious. He couldn't experience freedom like an ordinary person. He could only tell me, "Claire, you run and I'll capture it for you." I said, "No need. Let's just walk slowly together." Along the way, there were many hay bales rolled up by herders, and cattle and sheep often passed by. It was very comfortable to just be still. Julian, however, remained silent, a self-mocking curve tugging at the corner of his lips. We were out for 3 days, and he visibly lost weight, looking considerably more gaunt. If the trip was meant to recharge me, then for him, it was a form of torture. Suppressed emotions always find a moment to erupt. That day, I tried horse riding. Julian stood still, holding up the camera to take my picture. The horse began to move faster, transitioning from a walk to a trot, then breaking into a gallop. Julian held up the camera, pressing the shutter repeatedly. I was consumed by the exhilaration of the ride, and slowly closed my eyes. Then a sharp scream pierced my ears. It was Julian's voice. Julian had an episode. The reason for the episode was a couple nearby who had started arguing for some unknown reason. The man said he would beat the woman up when they got back, and the woman said if he dared to leave, she would stab him to death with a knife. The couple's argument became quite harsh, and people around them moved away, but Julian slowly turned to stare at them. As their argument grew fiercer, Julian's breathing grew heavier. Perhaps it was due to the intense tension of the past few days. Or perhaps he was recalling some unpleasant memories. When the man pushed the woman to the ground, Julian rushed forward to shield her. And then he had an episode. Julian couldn't control his emotions during his episode. I stayed by his side, comforting him again and again, until sunset, when he gradually calmed down. "Claire, I'm sorry I made you worry." He sat on the grass, hugging his knees, his eyes filled with desolation. "Was it awful coming out with me?" I gently shook my head and said, "No, it wasn't awful, but you're not happy. I saw your travel photos from Dolly. You looked so vibrant and happy. After you came home, you were never as happy as you were in those photos. I wanted you to be happy, so I asked you to come on this trip. But in my photos, you're nowhere near as radiant as you were in those taken by strangers in Dolly. While you were horse riding, I finally managed to take one good photo, but right after that single shot, I had an episode. Claire, I'm so useless. Being with me, I can't even help you relax, not even on a trip. How could anyone relax when traveling with someone who could have an episode at any moment?" What he said was true, and I couldn't argue with it. I sat with him on the grass, watching the sunset slowly dip below the horizon. He sat there, the light in his dark eyes sparse and broken, and said hoarsely, "Claire, I really am a terrible person." It was completely dark. I stood up, brushed the grass off myself, and said, "Don't overthink it. We already booked the return flight for tomorrow. The trip will be over soon. Tomorrow we go back, the day after is my birthday, and the day after that, I'll be able to leave with 1 million. Julian followed me as I stood up to leave. He was downcast the entire way, not saying a word. Even on the return journey, he remained unusually quiet, occasionally picking up his phone to arrange something. After returning home, he finally relaxed, his breathing steady. Before going to sleep, he hesitated repeatedly, then said, "Claire, tomorrow I have a new birthday gift for you." I thought the birthday gift would be a song or an item. But the next day he appeared at my bedroom door dressed in a suit and said, "Claire, let's go to the county courthouse. Let's file for divorce." Julian was a very stubborn person. He never changed his mind once he decided on something. So when he said he wouldn't divorce, I was prepared to spend 1 or 2 years in divorce proceedings. But I hadn't expected Julian to change his mind so suddenly. I couldn't help but ask him why. He said in a very calm tone, "You're unhappy. I don't want to drag you down anymore." As he said this, he even feigned lightness, his beautiful eyes curving into a slight arc, but his eyes were bloodshot. "Claire, I'm such a difficult and slow-witted person. It took me until after you left to even realize I loved you. I once had a dark thought. That no matter what, I would tie you to my side. But with me by your side, you're not happy at all." At this point, his voice choked, and his eyes reddened. "I've dragged you down long enough. I don't want you to be sad anymore, so I'm letting go." It was the first time I had ever seen him cry. I had always thought someone like him would never shed a tear. But in the car on the way to the county courthouse, his tears were scalding, falling onto my palm like an unstoppable spring rain. The car stopped at the county courthouse entrance. He wiped away his tears with the back of his hand, and with red-rimmed eyes, he opened the car door for me, forcing a smile as he said, "Claire, my 25th birthday gift to you is freedom, divorce." There was a 30-day mandatory waiting period, and during those 30 days, Grandpa Henry Sterling tried to persuade me to stay. He asked me, "Julian has already realized his feelings for you. Do you insist on divorce? Staying would clearly lead to a better life for you." I shook my head and said, "No. Once a person has tasted freedom, they can no longer willingly be bound." Grandpa Henry Sterling said, "Claire, nothing happened between him and Sage. Besides, he likes you now. His love just came a little late. Are you really going to abandon him like this? Can't you give him another chance?" But I still shook my head. Leaving the Sterling family caused a huge stir. Richard called and scolded me for a long time. And Eleanor Harrington also reproached me. They said I should be grateful to Julian. If the Sterling family hadn't chosen me back then, they would have sent me into an arranged marriage, perhaps to some widowed middle-aged man or some creepy guy who liked young girls. What more do you want? Do you know your brother-in-law has 3 children outside? He can tolerate that, so why can't you? In the end, Richard threatened to disown me. I nodded and said, "Fine." 30 days later, Julian and I went to the county courthouse to pick up our divorce certificate. Along with the divorce certificate was a check. Julian's assets were valued at around $1 billion, and this check was for $1 billion. He handed me the $1 billion check and said, "Claire, from now on go further, climb higher mountains, and explore a wider world. And will I be able to see you again in the future?" I nodded and said, "Of course. I'll invite you to my birthday party every year from now on." Julian sighed, then finally smiled, turning 1,000 unspoken words into a single phrase. "Claire, take care."